In today's politically charged climate, accountability and transparency aren't just expectations, they're demands. When figures in power are called to answer for their actions, the courtroom becomes more than just a legal battlefield, it becomes a stage where reputations are built or broken. One such moment has shaken the foundation of that stage, when Judge John Roberts issued a fine that echoed far beyond the legal walls, targeting none other than the rising conservative voice, Karoline Leavitt. But what followed wasn't silence or submission. Instead, Leavitt hit back, not just with outrage, but with secrets, evidence, and a voice that refused to be silenced. This isn't just a legal matter. It's a clash of ideals, generations, and the very meaning of justice in modern America. Let's delve into the firestorm unleashed by Judge Roberts' decision, and how Karoline Leavitt turned a fine into a fight. The moment Judge John Roberts handed down the fine, the legal and political communities were set ablaze with speculation, debate, and sharp division. The fine, widely viewed as both a punitive and symbolic move, carried far more weight than its monetary value. It signaled a boundary being drawn, a judicial reprimand aimed at halting what Roberts and his supporters interpreted as a breach of decorum, a challenge to institutional authority, or perhaps even a threat to the judicial status quo. To many, it was more than a procedural consequence, it was a calculated gesture intended to silence or at least discipline a rising voice. This voice, that of Karoline Leavitt, had grown louder in recent months, gaining traction among conservative circles for her unapologetic rhetoric, fierce patriotism, and relentless criticism of what she perceives as institutional overreach. Her sharp commentary on judicial bias, political gamesmanship in the courts, and selective enforcement of legal standards had not only won her support but had also placed her in the crosshairs of some of the nation's most powerful legal minds. The nature of the fine itself quickly became a matter of public interest. Speculation ranged from violations of courtroom protocol to the unauthorized disclosure of case-sensitive material. Yet, despite all the conjecture, the court records remained partially sealed, leaving a void filled with media conjecture and partisan commentary. Legal analysts pored over statements, parsed Roberts' language for deeper meanings, and debated the legal validity of the fine under both federal and procedural standards. Was this an overstep, a flexing of judicial muscle to reassert control? Or was it a justified disciplinary action taken in response to a legitimate breach? Questions mounted as clarity remained elusive. Meanwhile, Roberts, known for his calculated restraint and image-conscious leadership as Chief Justice, remained silent beyond the official filing. His decision to issue a fine rather than pursue harsher sanctions was interpreted by some as a move to neutralize Leavitt without escalating her platform through more drastic action. Behind the scenes, legal teams scrambled to understand the full scope of the penalty. Was this a standalone measure or the first of several potential legal consequences Leavitt might face? Some insiders hinted at ongoing investigations or ethics reviews, though nothing was confirmed. Constitutional scholars began weighing in, debating whether such fines represented a breach of free speech protections, particularly when levied against a public figure known for her political activism. The First Amendment quickly became part of the discourse, with defenders of Leavitt arguing that the fine represented a dangerous precedent, one where political speech critical of the judiciary could be punished under the guise of procedural discipline. This argument gained traction across conservative media platforms, where hosts and commentators painted Roberts' action as emblematic of a broader trend, the silencing of dissenting conservative voices through institutional means. As the controversy unfolded, Leavitt's legal team filed motions challenging the fine, demanding a full release of the court's justification and all supporting documentation. They argued that without full transparency, the fine functioned more as a political sanction than a legal one. Meanwhile, supporters of the court's decision countered that Leavitt had skirted ethical boundaries for months, using her platform to erode public trust in the judiciary, all under the banner of free speech. They pointed to past incidents where public figures had used inflammatory language to stir political unrest, warning that unchecked rhetoric could lead to real-world consequences. In this view, the fine wasn't just legal, it was necessary. The impact of the fine rippled quickly through legal and political spheres. Prominent members of Congress began weighing in, some calling for hearings, others warning of judicial overreach. Republican lawmakers largely sided with Leavitt, some going so far as to call for a review of Roberts' decision, framing it as a potential abuse of power. On the other side, Democratic representatives highlighted the importance of judicial independence, praising Roberts for standing firm in the face of what they considered an orchestrated attempt to delegitimize the judiciary. Political PACs used the moment to rally their bases, with fundraising emails highlighting the controversy as either proof of systemic bias or the last stand of judicial accountability. The media frenzy only fueled the fire. Talk shows, podcasts, YouTube channels, and mainstream networks dissected every angle, some even inviting legal experts to role-play court scenarios or debate potential Supreme Court appeals. As coverage intensified, the actual legal basis for the fine became less important than the spectacle surrounding it. Hashtags began trending. Political cartoons depicted Roberts as a hammer-wielding overlord or as a weary referee trying to maintain order. Memes flooded the internet. The story wasn't just about legality anymore, it had become cultural, symbolic, a flashpoint in a wider war over speech, power, and influence. In this chaotic atmosphere, other judges and legal figures began to speak out, either in support of Roberts' actions or in cautious disapproval. Some called for greater transparency and consistency in the application of fines or other sanctions. Others warned that public trust in the judiciary could erode further if courtrooms were seen as places where political opponents could be financially penalized. The legal world, typically governed by slow, deliberate processes, suddenly found itself caught in the whirlwind of public opinion, media spin, and partisan warfare. Law schools and legal institutions began organizing panels and discussions, attempting to address the broader questions raised by the case. Is the judiciary truly independent in today's America? How far can judges go in disciplining public figures without appearing politically motivated? Can political speech ever truly be separated from its legal consequences? These were not new questions, but the fine handed down by Judge Roberts had revived them with new urgency. The case, still unresolved in many respects, served as a mirror for America's evolving relationship with its institutions and its increasingly polarized views on power and accountability. Karoline Leavitt's response to the fine issued by Judge Roberts was anything but subdued. Rather than shrinking in the face of legal consequences, she emerged with defiance, conviction, and a strategic unveiling of information that shook the very foundation of the case against her. Leavitt, known for her bold political stance and combative media presence, turned what many expected to be a moment of embarrassment into a platform for revelation. Within hours of the fine becoming public, she held a press conference, flanked by her legal team, advisors, and several high-profile political allies. Cameras clicked and news outlets scrambled as she addressed the nation not with apology, but with a fiery retort. She began by accusing the judiciary, and specifically Judge Roberts, of bias, suggesting that the fine was not based on any objective legal principle but rather on personal and political motivations. Her tone was unapologetic, her message clear, she was not backing down, and she had more to say. The core of Leavitt's counterattack was not just rhetorical. In what became the most explosive moment of her public statement, she alluded to a set of sealed documents and communications that, according to her, painted a vastly different picture of the events leading up to the fine. She claimed that internal court communications revealed inconsistencies, selective enforcement of procedural rules, and even potential ideological targeting. Though she stopped short of revealing full details during her initial speech, the implication was clear: she had access to confidential or undisclosed information that could expose procedural flaws or political motivations behind the court's actions. This declaration sent shockwaves through both legal and media landscapes, triggering a wave of speculation and urgency among analysts who suddenly found themselves parsing every word of Leavitt's speech for hints at the content of these alleged secrets. Leavitt's legal team followed up swiftly by filing multiple motions demanding the release of specific internal memos, email correspondence between court staff, and transcripts from in-camera discussions held before the fine was finalized. In one particularly bold filing, they accused the court of procedural irregularity and lack of due process, arguing that Leavitt was not given a fair chance to contest the alleged violations that led to the fine. Meanwhile, conservative media outlets launched full-scale coverage, championing Leavitt as a whistleblower and a victim of judicial overreach. Talk show hosts framed her revelations as the tip of a much larger iceberg, a hidden network of politically motivated legal actions designed to silence rising conservative voices. In response, social media platforms lit up with hashtags supporting Leavitt and demanding transparency from the courts. As the days progressed, Leavitt began selectively releasing redacted snippets of internal documents, each one sparking new controversy. One excerpt suggested that a senior court clerk expressed concern about how Leavitt's public image might affect the court's reputation. Another revealed discussions about whether disciplining her publicly might send a message to other political commentators. Though none of the leaks directly implicated Judge Roberts in overt wrongdoing, they painted a picture of a court that was not entirely immune to external perceptions and political calculations. Critics argued that Leavitt was manipulating partial information to fuel a political narrative, but her supporters saw the leaks as proof that she was being unfairly targeted by an institution unwilling to tolerate dissent. Amid the growing tension, Leavitt began to frame her legal struggle as part of a broader movement. She referenced other public figures, journalists, and activists who had faced institutional backlash for speaking out. She positioned herself not just as a defendant but as a symbol of resistance, calling for judicial reform and increased accountability. Her campaign team seized the moment, launching a digital petition, fundraising drives, and even a podcast series chronicling her legal battle. The podcast, titled Unsealed: The Fight for Truth, featured interviews with legal experts, political allies, and behind-the-scenes audio from strategy sessions. It quickly rose to the top of political podcast charts, extending Leavitt's reach far beyond traditional media. Legal scholars began weighing in, some cautioning that Leavitt's actions could set a dangerous precedent by undermining respect for the judiciary. Others argued that her defiance, while aggressive, was within her rights, especially if she could substantiate claims of bias or unfair treatment. Several high-profile attorneys published op-eds, some defending the sanctity of judicial independence, others urging courts to adopt clearer standards for sanctioning public figures. Meanwhile, Judge Roberts remained publicly silent, adhering to the traditional restraint expected of federal judges, but insiders reported that private discussions within the court had become increasingly tense. Pressure mounted for the release of the full court record related to the fine. Advocacy groups on both sides filed amicus briefs, and legal watchdog organizations demanded an independent review. The transparency debate reached Congress, where a small group of lawmakers proposed legislation requiring courts to disclose more information when sanctioning public figures. Although the bill faced an uphill battle, it signaled how far-reaching the impact of Leavitt's response had become. Her defiance had not only disrupted a legal proceeding but had ignited a national debate about the boundaries of judicial authority and the rights of individuals to criticize the system. Throughout the ordeal, Leavitt continued to appear at rallies, media interviews, and legal panels, often citing historical examples of individuals who challenged the status quo. She drew comparisons to past whistleblowers, civil liberties cases, and controversial legal confrontations, using each reference to frame herself as part of a larger historical arc. Her speeches became increasingly polished and impassioned, weaving together legal jargon, populist rhetoric, and appeals to constitutional principles. Her audience grew more diverse, with supporters ranging from libertarian legal theorists to grassroots conservatives who saw her battle as a test of institutional integrity. As the case continued, Leavitt's team signaled that they were preparing for the possibility of escalation, including appeals to higher courts and even potential challenges to Roberts' role in the case. At the same time, efforts were being made behind the scenes to negotiate a possible resolution. Sources close to the matter indicated that back-channel discussions had begun, with intermediaries floating the idea of withdrawing the fine in exchange for a public clarification from Leavitt. However, her public posture remained defiant, and there was no indication she was prepared to compromise.